Hello and welcome to the Degrees of Success podcast. I'm your host, Freda Richards, and today we have an incredible guest. We have Brian Dickinson. He is a former Navy rescue swimmer, turned mountaineer, turned author, and has an incredible story about his climb to Mount Everest. Brian, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Of course. And of course, you're here because you are a University of Phoenix alumni getting your MBA, and your story is incredible, which is definitely the reason that we invited you today. So thank you for joining us. I want to jump right into the basics, the foundation. Tell us about where you're from, your childhood, and what kind of kid you were.
Yeah, so I grew up in the 80s. So not a lot of technology back then. Definitely couldn't have went to University of Phoenix online back then, but also not all the distractions and social medias and just, chaos that our kids are growing up with today. So I was very adventurous. I grew up in Southern Oregon, very small town, like 2,000 people that live in the town, and was just always in the mountains and always outdoors and just, enjoying life as much as I could. Grew up with, not the greatest scenario, like, traumatic upbringing and alcoholism and all that stuff. So I definitely found my peace outdoors and had opportunities to go to college right away, had opportunities for a soccer scholarship as well as art. But I wanted to just go see the world and, do something different. So I decided to join the Navy.
Wow. So a scholarship in soccer and art. It's so like very different, different talents there, physical and then also so very creative. Do you still do art?
Not so much. I always figure that's going to be something in my retirement years where, it's one of those things I'm going to paint someday, but like being in the season of life with kids and just everything else that we'll be talking about, it's like, something has to give. And I'm actually, as an author now, I feel that creativeness has really come through and being able to not only tell my story, but so many other stories that have in my new book.
That is awesome. Tell me about your family. So tell us, when did you meet your wife, and tell us about your awesome children?
Yeah. So my wife and I met in San Diego when I was stationed down there. She was going to San Diego State, and we actually met in the hot tub at the complex that we lived in. So great story there. And I was initially, she wasn't impressed by me initially. And I think the opposite, reactions just brought us together. And, we both came from pretty dysfunctional situations, and we had each other, and we clunked along and just took time. I wanted to get out of the military before I got married, just because deploying is just really difficult on a family. But got out in '99, and we got married, and then we moved up to the Pacific Northwest, went to grad school, and then we had our kids, have a boy and a girl. So my daughter is almost 21. She just graduated with her bachelor's from the University of Washington. And my son is 18, and he's in running start. So he's actually completing his associate's degree full-time at Bellevue College. And then he will have 2 more years. And he's actually looking to go down to Phoenix to get a degree in entrepreneurship. So kind of accelerated. It's interesting because both kids, they did this accelerated program. So they're like 20 years old with a bachelor's degree. And it's like, oh my gosh, it's like start adulting pretty early. So I think Joanna and I have just been my wife's name's Joanna, and I have been very, diligent about making sure they're living and not just, living to work or anything. We've always had a very adventurous lifestyle. Like my daughter had the opportunity to travel around the world while I was climbing and to do mission work. And I think by the time she was 13, she had been on 6 of the 7 continents. And when they were both like 5 and 8, they climbed the highest peak in Australia with me. And so always have these opportunities to just immerse them into, whatever Joanna and I are doing. Just, you know, life's too short. I mean, every day is a gift. So you never know.
That is a fact. And it sounds like your family is just as adventurous as you. So you have a 6 and an 8-year-old going up a mountain in the cold. They were happy with this?
Oh yeah. Super
You're,
happy.
you're going to have to teach me
their
your tricks.
their favorite thing each year, like growing up, is winter mountaineering. So I live in the Pacific Northwest in Washington. So, we'd go camping during the summer and everything, but they love when we would just snowshoe in, it could be 5 feet of snow and we're just, digging in a snow cave and, have our tent and whatever else, but just the adventure of it all. And, just playing in the snow and just, it's most people don't do those type of things and they think it's crazy, but when you're a little bit skilled in those things and have some experience, it's not that insane, and you can make anything fun, and we definitely made it fun. So they have those experiences that most don't, and I think from a level of grit as well, a lot of kids are just kind of missing that grit factor these days. So I was instilling that as much as I could. And my wife and I, we are still opposite. She's a Christian counselor and scared of heights. We balance each other out very well. And you can tell by the kids, they're definitely a blend of both of us. Thankfully, more so on her side.
On mom's side. And you said she's a Christian counselor. Mm-hmm. And you are this adventurous. And you guys both came from a pretty rocky childhood, you said.
Yeah. Just mental illness, alcoholism, abuse. So, but yeah, it's, we found each other, and, God puts people together in certain ways, and we were put together. And even when we were in our 20s, we were just, I don't know, kind of a mess, but we had each other, and we found this small church where like the next youngest person was probably, 40 years older than us. Even the pastors was like, what are you guys doing here? Like, I love that you guys are here, but there's nothing here for you in your early 20s. We're like, I don't know. We like it. We feel safe, and it's a good, healthy distraction, and we're focused on something bigger than ourselves. And, so yeah, that's something in life, right? I know everyone listening has their own stuff, and, that's been one thing for me. I've been asked, like, how didn't I, what is different, and I think the fact that I don't camp in it, I think life deals, stuff that, it's not fair. It's out of your control, but you can camp in that your whole life and be the victim, or you can use that and break the cycle and move forward. So tried to do that. And, been somewhat successful, but we try, we fail, and then we try again. And it's better to try and fail than to never try at all.
It sounds like that due to your wife and your experience in childhood, that you all made a conscious choice to change that and to break that chain for the generations following you all. And I think that that's powerful within itself, that you made the choice that it ends with you.
Yeah. And it's interesting because you can have, thank you for that, but you can have, like, I have a brother and a sister. I'm the youngest. You can have 3 people come from the same environment and they're going to respond completely different. And I don't necessarily need to go into that. They're great. But for me and Joanna, it's not like we ran from our family either. We created structured boundaries and we enforced it. Like, my parents knew if they wanted to visit with the family, they couldn't drink around us. And it's not like we don't have an occasional drink, but it's different when there's, pretty extreme alcoholism, it's a disease. So we enforce those boundaries. So we have had a relationship with family, and same, on her side as well. So I think that's important. I think you can fight or flight, you can freeze, you can run from your problems, but they're still there, whether you deal with them or not. So, and sometimes things are just so incredibly unhealthy that, I mean, you do have to cut those ties. So it's a matter of knowing that every situation is unique. So I'm not just going to like bundle anything into anything right now. It's just, that's been our experience.
Yeah. And then you created those boundaries so that your children and you all would be safe moving forward, which I think is powerful and wise of you. Tell me this. As you were growing up, clearly you told me that you loved to be outside in nature and that was a part of escaping. Who did you follow? What influences did you have to help lead you or guide you into this incredible path that you've been on?
Yeah. So I was very fortunate that my grandparents moved up from California and lived across the creek. So we had like 3 acres, and then across the creek, that was kind of our safety. So my grandpa was very influential as far as that father figure. And he actually was a really really extreme alcoholic, but for the core of my childhood, he stopped cold turkey, and he was just Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. He was just like, whichever one of those is the good one. He was just a solid, solid role model, and just loving, unconditionally loving, and just very influential. And yeah, it was very, very difficult. And this is kind of a tie-in to, and I know we'll talk about military, but when his wife, my grandma, had got cancer and then she passed away, he went back to drinking for a small time. And that's kind of when I went into the military. And while I was doing my main training to be a rescue swimmer, he actually shot himself and didn't die right away, but it was pretty soon after. And so it was just, my father figure was, basically taken from me. And then when I met my wife a few years later, her dad passed away, and he was the strong one in the family there that she was really close to, died from a brain tumor. So we both had our basically father figures um, died, and yeah, so then we had each other. So that was really difficult.
Wow. So you guys lost your most influential people and your foundation and support and then clung to each other.
Yeah, probably unhealthily clung to each other, but at least we had each other. But yeah, but it was, we had to work through that, and over time, it's easy to look back and be like, oh, that was maybe not so healthy or whatever, that you go through, but it was all part of the process, and we are who we are because we walked it out.
Completely. Well, speaking of the military, I know that you actually became an aviation rescue swimmer. Can you tell me more about that?
hmm Yeah, so that's the men and women who jump out of helicopters and rescue down pilots, do combat search and rescue, aerial gunner support, deploying Navy SEALs, and also anti-submarine warfare. I mean, just everything you can imagine. The helicopter, it's like jack of all trades. But yeah, the training for it it's one of the most difficult, just because the most people don't work well in those environments. Most people aren't great swimmers, for one. But when you're underwater being attacked in the middle of the ocean, you have to train for all those scenarios, and then advanced first aid, and just there's a lot that goes into it. It's a high attrition rate. It's if you Google like the most dangerous jobs, it's always ranked, at least in the top 5, usually like 1 or 2, just because when everyone else is running from the problem, we're flying into it. We're jumping into that. We're on the side of the mountain, rescuing, even extracting maybe a special forces group that is pinned down, or whatever. So I think there's a lot. I never compare like one military job or any job to another, just because every job is honorable and has their risks. So I'll let Google do it for me.
I love that. So everyone could head to Google for that. But what I will say is thank you so much for your service. I myself am an Army brat slash Marine brat, and I know what it's like to have a mom and a dad. And even my husband actually was a Marine, and
Oh,
the
awesome.
service that you all put in and the sacrifice. So thank you for your service.
Thanks.
Of course. I know that the SARS training is like one of the most intense, as you had said. Can you tell me about like a challenging moment and what you learned through that?
Uh, yeah, I mean, there's plenty. I mean, that's, and in fact, I know we'll talk about my book, Calm in the Chaos, but I wrote the last 3 years, I was doing the research. There's never been a book written on it. So it had to be approved through the DoD and everything, just because there's classified things that I know I kept out, but I didn't want to go to prison over it. So I let them figure it out. But I do describe in detail the training. Like one is like the helo dunker, like you have to train to crash in a helicopter. So they put you in a tube, all strapped in, full gear, blindfolded, drops into the water. Helicopters are top heavy because of the rotors. So after the violence stops, then it's about to hit again because the rotors rip off as it flips upside down. So you're strapped in to this device. You have to wait for all the commotion as it's completely underwater, sinking, and now you have to get out a certain door or window that they'll tell you a second before they drop you. So like the co-pilot's window. But once you're disoriented, upside down, water going up your nose, blindfolded, it's all hand over hand. Because you imagine you crash at night or anywhere, because as you go deeper, you're going to be, it's dark. No oxygen, anything else. And it's a cabin full of panicked people for the most part. Not everyone's a rescue swimmer in there. So you have pilots and crewmen and stuff. So now left is right, right is left, up is down, down is up, because you're totally disoriented. So that's an aircrew school. That's not even rescue swimmer school. So you got to kind of get through that and remain calm and find your way out hand over hand. But a lot of the rescue training in rescue swimmer school, for one, it's like hand-to-hand combat in the water. So people panic in the water. They're in shock. As soon as you jump from the helicopter, they see you as flotation. And the helicopter itself, the rotor wash is so intense, just the downward pressure and the sound, it's just a high pitched, squeal of the engines. I equate it to someone in close range throwing like gravel in your face. It's really intense. So you can imagine someone who's already in shock and panicked, and now you're towing them towards that so I can get to the hoist, get them strapped in, and we hoist up, 70 feet to the helicopter. So they're panicked. Of course, they're going to, try to, use me as flotation. So we have to learn every imaginable hand-to-hand combat in the water to gain control of them. Not only that, but then to get them to safety in that rotor wash, to then get them hoisted up. And that training's, a lot of that's blindfolded as well. So you never see the hit coming. And it's changed since I was in. Now they call it water jujitsu, which is essentially what it is. But when I was in, we actually took them underwater. So once I got hit, my eyes are closed, I'm swimming, and then someone dives off the side of the pool or whatever in the training pool. They hit you, you're underwater, you don't have time to breathe. You take them down deep, which in a lot of times will induce panic. So they're trying to get to air, so then you can kind of get control. But of course, in a training scenario, you always do worst case scenario. So they're locked on. So we had to use pressure points and different techniques and strength and maneuvers to gain control of them, and then get on top of the water and try to calm them down as they're spinning. And yeah, so that was good. That definitely taught a lot of confidence. A lot of people at our local pool, I think probably think I'm abusive when teaching my kids that in the deep end, while their kids are, playing with their floaties and the parents are on the side of the pool drinking and having fun. just some life skills to pay forward.
Oh my goodness. What are you doing? You're just throwing your kids in and saying like, you could do it, float.
Yeah, or drown proofing. Like if you were to tie their feet and their hands behind their back, and then have them let out all their breath, go down to the bottom, push off, come up, and just remain calm. But also just some of the different techniques of life saving, just some of what I was just talking about, kind of pressure points and different things. So.
That is impeccable. I would have panicked. I was slightly panicking just listening to what you would have to go through and feeling the rotors. No. I imagine that you learning to stay calm in those moments had to be so important to be able to be successful at your job, saving people constantly. And you said that this was the more entry level version of training, not necessarily the more intense level. And that alone sounds like a lot and incredible. I'm glad that they're able to train you so intensely, but at the same time, what are you processing when this is happening? Are you thinking to yourself like, okay, great, I'll be prepared if and when something like this happens? Or is it similar to like my initial reaction, like, oh my goodness, this is a lot?
Yeah, there's a high attrition rate. So a lot of those people that can't, I guess, remain calm. In the end, it's all about staying calm. They're not going to make it. So like each day was harder than the next day. And the group that started just got smaller and smaller. And then the instructors just had more to focus on us. So, I think a lot of us, there was such a fear of failure that we would do anything. A lot of people would black out, have shallow water blackout, and have to be revived on the side of the pool because you're doing everything you can to not quit. It's voluntary. You can quit at any moment. And what I found, as I was researching for this new book, what I found was a lot of the people that made it through had similar upbringings, and you can come from and I guess unconsciously come from a traumatic background. And this is the same with like first responders and just people in this field, is where you feel comfortable in those traumatic situations. And it's this unconscious effort of trying, because you had no control growing up, right? So stuff happened to you. Now you're in the position where you can take control. You can change the outcome. And that can be healthy to an extent. But I think, I don't know, like mentally, emotionally, just the awareness is pretty important, because you can take anything to an extreme. But it can certainly make you very effective in that role.
Absolutely. You took the thought right out of my mind. I was actually going to ask, do you think that you can handle that due to what you experienced, the trauma you experienced in your childhood? And it sounds like you're saying not only do you believe that assisted you in being able to manage that trauma training, but also the ones that lasted in the training.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. What did you learn in that training that you still use today?
All of it. There's so many things that are just, it became a part of my DNA. So many of us, we have this protective bubble that, we create for ourselves, and we fear going outside of that. So we truly don't know what we're capable of. This type of training, it it leaves no doubt. Like if you can't get outside of it, then you fail and you go do some other job, and that's totally fine, because not everyone is meant for the military or special operations, and that's good, right? Just like a lot of people probably shouldn't be parents, and it's like there's no license for that. I guess that's another route.
True, nonetheless.
You can cut that out if you want. But yeah, just like the breathing and the remaining calm, and life can be interesting, once you get outside of the military as well, because, when you're immersed in it, you're being deployed, every flight was some form of trauma. You never knew it was coming. You were just ready for anything. And that can weigh on you. And then once you get out, the you can have a normal job, and it's hard to take a lot of that serious. To what I mean is, everything is important, but the amount of focus and just heartache that some people will have in certain scenarios, it's like you're willing to jump on a grenade for your buddy that you've been through just hell through, and now someone's upset because someone, I don't know, phone was on during a meeting, I don't know, just yeah, something, yeah, that's disrespectful and everything, but we're all going to live, we'll make it through this. And I think the media and everything else, today, they balloon everything up, and everyone is just in this scare tactic, I don't know, just fearful living. And I think just you take a step back and just relax. Like, the sun will rise tomorrow and the next day, and things are going to be okay.
That is incredible advice, because there's studies saying that after 2020, the rise in depression and anxiety just skyrocketed. And to your point, the media can scare you. People, they do the scare tactics with, they did it with a few different things. And they could possibly do it with, elections or anything along those lines, causing people just great angst on both sides. As you are an experienced person in trauma through your childhood and going through these trainings, if you were to tell our listeners who could possibly be feeling any fear or frustration or anxiety due to what they're watching, with your experience saving lives, and in contrast, what we're hearing and feeling due to possibly what media we could be watching, what information? I heard you say, people commonly say, "Go touch grass." That's what's commonly said now. If you're ever looking like in social media comments and people are saying something outrageous, they say, "Go touch grass. You need to go outside and get some vitamin D." What would your feedback or just some good notes to people would be for them if they were experiencing that anxiety or fear?
Yeah, I think unplugging. I mean, the grass thing is good, but it's nature therapy. Like, for me, just getting out, the whole fresh air. I live in the Pacific Northwest, so it's always a gamble if I'm going to get any of that sunshine that you were mentioning earlier. But still, just, we put these limitations on us, and it's so easy to be connected all the time. Man, if you just disconnect for a little bit. But it's also, so in that training, what we would get yelled at all the time, which is interesting, is don't panic, breathe. It would just be like, just screamed at us, don't panic. Like, you're screaming at me, it's causing me to panic, until you're like learned not to. And it's a lot of it is identifying those triggers and the things that will induce panic, because everyone's unique. One thing's going to cause panic for another, because we all have our different childhoods and our fears and triggers. So I think just the more education and understanding, and I'm a big proponent of counseling, not just because my wife is one, but because I've been through a lot of traumatic things in my life, and just having some talk therapy, and it's important. And even medication, if that's what somebody needs. I'm not like, go get medicated right away, but we're wired differently. And if you have some other type of disease, you would have no problem taking medication. But some people are just so like, oh no, I can't take that because I'm dealing with PTSD or something. Like, why not? Like, that's literally what you need. So anyways, I'm a proponent of that. But yeah, and then just breathing. That's the second part to not panicking.
Thank you for removing the shame behind anxiety, depression, counseling, because I imagine maybe for some listeners hearing that counseling is something that you support. And then obviously breathing and associating and addressing the fact that I am panicking or I'm feeling anxiety, and then working your way through that and then getting professional help for it. I imagine that could be helpful hearing that from you, a person who's done so many incredible, brave things, and then is still willing to be open and transparent and getting help and removing the stigma behind medicine for that mental health as well. So thank you for that.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, I think it's super important. And I give a lot of talks, and I don't know, I've certainly changed in my ability to be vulnerable over time has definitely changed. And I've seen the outreach from that. And, you know, there's so many reasons that we don't take that step forward. And in my experience, very few are valid. They're barriers that we create or someone in our life created.
Right.
And there's so many people that are seeking help and just need someone to just, have that vulnerability.
Yes.
And I don't know, it's powerful. So thank you.
That is powerful. Your testimony is, your test is your testimony. And it's for others, which is, I try to think of that when I'm going through something or having a hard experience, to document it and then put the resolve, because there's a resolve coming. And then to share that. I was recently given advice to, when something incredible happens, to just record it on my phone. So you can make like folders and then just record when incredible things happen, or really maybe like a tough something's happening, and then to record those resolves as well. And this to review it at the end of the year, because a lot of times we have a tendency to dismiss when we've overcome something, we've accomplished something, because the world's moving so fast. It's just on to the next thing. And you could feel like you're not actually moving forward, when in reality, if you just take a moment to document, whether written or on video, your successes, your traumas, whatever it is that you're working through that year, and those resolves, it's incredible to see at the end of the year when you see like, oh yeah, I was really upset about that, but then that got handled like that. Yeah, that, so like in the end, you recognize that maybe that anxiety or frustration or like high concern can be less in the future, because you know that you're going to get that resolve check mark, just as you had done before.
Yeah, journaling is so important. And a lot of like counselors will say, well, let's journal this, so then you can actually unpack it. And I'll always recommend that, even when I've, probably because getting my MBA through University of Phoenix, I as I was managing people in like the high tech industry, I don't want to lose anyone on my team. But at the same time, if the company isn't the right fit for them, if it's, suppressing their growth, I'm all up, like what you're saying, even from a business perspective, update your resume often and take it to the next level. Go take an interview somewhere else. If anything, it'll validate where you're at.
Very true.
Or it'll open the door and, realize you shouldn't be there. So no, it's super important. And you're right, man, time just flies. So that journaling is so important. And I know for me, even as I was diagnosed with the VA for PTSD and some of the things I've dealt with from my military and life, it's when I started journaling, it was pretty intense, because it just starts coming out, and it's there the whole time. It's in a box. You may have even blocked out certain segments in your life, and it's scary because then you got to deal with it. But when you do, I mean, there is so much freedom. It's so insane. I love having conversations where it's very evident that someone else is going through something, and it might not be their timing, but there has to be a time at some point, because it'll never be your time if you don't have that courage to just step forward. And we can't play God. So, I mean, you can only do so much. You can, lead them, lead others, give them, I don't know, just show them the vulnerability, the courage that maybe you had in a certain area. And maybe even having that conversation, you realize there's other areas in my own life that, I need to actually deal with. And
Absolutely.
having that, conversation and just, let's do this together.
Absolutely. Yeah. And how incredible of you to even mention partnering with someone, being their accountability partner. I think that's important as well. You mentioned journaling. So I already know that you're a great writer because you have 2 books. But the very first one, if I'm not mistaken, is The Blind Descent, which is about your Everest story. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Can you tell us more about the book?
Yeah. Do you want to hear about the book or the story?
First, I want to hear about the book, but you can tell it however you'd like. I'd also like to see the book because I know that you have it close by. I wish I had it here to display.
Oh, Blind Descent.
Excellent.
Surviving alone and blind on Mount Everest.
Tell us about you surviving alone and blind on Mount Everest.
Yeah, so actually after I graduated from the University of Phoenix, I was working in high tech, Expedia, when they were part of Microsoft. We spun off. I was there for 5 years. And then I was at Cisco Systems for 10 years. And I still have a real job. I'm at NetScout. Been here for going on 8 or 9 years. But my MBA was in technology management. So I've just kind of like got into the technology side of life. But I've had a lot of freedom, I guess, working from home, like way before it was cool, way before COVID. And decided to climb, well, even backing up. So got out of the military, got my education, was working, and realized that, I'm wired a little bit differently, and I wasn't necessarily fulfilling that adventure side of my life. So I decided to get into high altitude mountaineering and climb the highest peaks on the 7 continents. So living here in the Pacific Northwest, we have the Cascades, Mount Rainier, and just all these amazing like volcanoes and highly glaciated peaks. So I definitely get my fix out here. It's like I can, go 2 miles and find like a 5,000 foot peak and, do an 8 mile round trip and, get fit doing it. But I wanted to take it to the next level, which is a pattern in my life, and climb the highest peak. My wife's just like, "Are you serious?" I'm like, and then she knew the answer. So the 4th one that I did was Mount Everest. So that was in 2011. And I didn't climb as a part of a group. So a lot of times you have like large groups that'll go together. I climbed independent, and just because I'm used to soloing a lot of mountains. In fact, I've soloed the highest peak on the northern and southern hemisphere. I don't know if that's a record or not, but I'm not really big on records. They're just meant to be broken. But I climbed independent. I had some Sherpa support. So Sherpa are the local people that live in Nepal and Tibet, up at altitude. Just amazing people. Just very, very simple, but just strong and just loving. I'd recommend anyone go spend some time with some Sherpa. It'll just change your life. And I'm still good friends with a bunch of my Sherpa friends. But Pasong and I, he was a young climber, had a couple Everest summits already, and it was my first attempt. So he and I were partnered together, came in the 38 miles on foot from Kathmandu, flew into Lukla, and then you're up in the Khumbu Valley, did the 38 miles in, carrying our weight. And that's where you actually get to base camp. So that's where you start climbing Everest. And this book, Blind Descent, is all about my experience up there. So fast forward, it takes 2 months to climb Everest because at 29,035 feet, the mountain stands at the same altitude that, major jet airliners cruise at. So there's only a third of the air, third of the ozone up there. So if you are to pluck your body from wherever you're at, close to sea level, I am, put you on the top, you would just pass out and die. So you have to acclimate. So that means starting at base camp at 17,500 feet, you climb through the Khumbu Icefall, which is a river of building-sized blocks of ice. And they're constantly falling, and it's super, super dangerous. I don't recommend it. And that's where you see like all those aluminum ladders you're going across with the spikes on your boots, and this maneuvering. Every time I went through like 8 times as I was acclimating. It was a different route because avalanches would kick off, and it was always changing the route. But you have to acclimate because your body it can't survive. Like up in the death zone at 26,000 feet, if you cut your finger, it won't heal. But if you climb high, then go back down and rest, your body produces more red blood cells, which carry oxygen.
Okay.
So it's pretty amazing, like as you're just going back and forth, because it's miserable. I mean, there's nothing glamorous about mountaineering. You're living in a tent, you stink, you just want to throw up the whole time, you're tired, but you just find a reason and you just keep pushing through. And
so I have to pause you for a moment. So I'm hearing you say that you walked 38 miles to get to base camp. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay. So whatever you have with you within that 38 miles is what you have for this whole entire trip.
Mm-hmm.
What's in the bag?
So you actually have a couple expedition bags, and Sherpa will either carry or have yaks bring some of that gear. I had my own pack and had some gear as well. But from Lukla, it's actually the I think highest and most dangerous airport in the world. I mean, it's this tiny little strip, and you either land or you don't. It's like you're just flying from Kathmandu, and then it's like, we're going to land there. And
wow.
It's just right on the side of a mountain. It's pretty intense. But yeah, from there, it's like a trek, 38 miles to get to base camp. And because you're getting up to 17,500 feet, it takes about 10 days because you have to like rest at certain different areas along the way because you're acclimating, you're feeling horrible. It's amazing though. The highest peaks in the world are just surrounding you as you're just walking through this valley. So it's awesome. But yeah, it's a lot of work just to get to base camp. Is that's a pretty cool thing to do. I'd love to bring my family and do that at some point.
That would be incredible. So in your bag, you have your snacks, food, extra clothes, oxygen?
Not yet. So the oxygen okay. they'll bring up, you don't even start using oxygen until about 23,000 feet.
Okay.
So not even out of base camp. It's way up higher. But no, yeah, you think about living for 2 months. So you have like all your food and treats and whatever, books and clothing, extra sleeping bags, because, I have maybe like a -20 bag, which can have like -20 degrees Fahrenheit survive. And then a -40 for up higher on the mountain. Then I have a full down suit, and I have different climbing gear, ice axe, helmet, harness, all just tons of gear. The crampons, which are the spikes on my boots, it's like, it's a lot of stuff. So yeah, I was grateful when I got to base camp and the stuff that wasn't with me was actually there, because it's like, okay, well, if I don't have all this, I can't go. But yeah, it's a lot of gear. It's the logistics of climbing some of these high peaks it's a lot. Like you just want to get there and just do the work, but there's so much that goes around it.
Right. And so you said it takes 2 months essentially to climb this mountain, but it's all about acclimation. So if you're 38 miles away, you've flown into the most dangerous airport, you've walked 38 miles, you're at base, and you continue to practice going up and down to acclimate your body.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no shower or like, oh, now it's time to rest and have warm tea. Like you're in it. deep in it for 2 months.
Yeah, I mean, there's like a cook tent in base camp. It's it's a resort down there. I had my own tent. No, it's not a resort, but there's like a there's like a bathroom tent with a bucket. There is like a shower, but it's down there, but it's a bucket of hot water, and
Okay.
it could be like 0 degrees outside, and you're in there and you're moving fast, and I don't know. There's just a level of stench that you get after being on a mountain for a while that is just not okay. It's like when it's bothering yourself, it's like, okay, I've reached that point.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so you're at base one. You may have a stench or not, but you have a goal to get to the top of
I
Everest.
do. Mhm. Yeah, so pretty much for the next month is acclimating. In fact, I hit base camp, and then I actually went 15 miles back outside of base camp and climbed a 20,000 foot peak called Island Peak to acclimate on. That was less dangerous
Okay.
to get to the altitude. So that helped, and then came back in, and then I started going up and down the mountain. So yeah, you go up to camp one, touch it, head back down, rest a couple days, and it's all based on weather too. Like if avalanches are kicking off and it's bad weather, then you want to be safe, make good decisions, and then go spend the night at camp one. And I was actually up there on Easter Sunday by myself. I was on the mountain by myself quite a bit, and I remember I had like a little laptop, and I watched The Empire Strikes Back. So I was kind of feeling sad and sorry for myself that day, but that kind of lessened the blow. And then went up to camp two, which is like 21,000 feet. And to get from camp one to camp two, so camp one is above that Khumbu ice fall, that river of flowing building sized blocks of ice.
Mhm.
It's a valley, a cum, CWM is cum. So it's a valley, but there's one section that there's 5 aluminum ladders tied together,
Mhm.
and it's a bottomless crevasse. If you fall in there, in fact, people have fallen in, and actually when we were there, some people that had fallen in like 20 years prior finally churned up like 5 miles down at the base of the glacier. So that was probably a closure for the family.
Wow.
But I think the lesson here is don't fall in.
Right.
So going across that ladder was pretty intense, because think about wearing spikes on your boots and being on an aluminum ladder that's just tied off, anchored on each side. Yeah, you get good at it, but it's not very graceful. Like if you got to get down and like crawl, that's okay. Uh, but yeah, you get pretty good at it.
You're there and they've unearthed bodies that were in the hole for 20 years and you're about to climb over them. What's going through your mind during that?
Well, not that. I'm I'm just getting to the other side. I'm just one step at a time. A lot of times, you can be overwhelmed. I mean, that was military training as well, right? If you look at the big picture, it's good to get the big picture so you know where you fit in, but you can easily get overwhelmed. To get there, you need to take one step forward and then another step. So,
Right.
breaking down into attainable chunks is very important.
That's excellent. I mean, that's basically the way to get through any large task, right? They
Mm-hmm.
say take a bite of an elephant one bite at a time. I'm a vegetarian and I love elephants, so that's not my favorite phrase, but I know
Yeah.
exactly what you mean. So you've just crossed over the aluminum ladders over this hole that people have fallen in. You're staying focused to get to your goal. You're at the end of the ladder. What's next?
Yep. So that leads up to camp two, which is advanced base camp. So there's a cooking tent, and that was my first experience. Well, I mean, I'd been up. No, that was the highest I'd ever been. So that at that point, so just trying to build the tents is just insane. Like every step you take, it takes about 5 seconds because there's not enough air and your body is just struggling. So it's really hard to describe to people that haven't experienced that. But even like putting my tent up, putting the poles together, I remember just sitting down and just like, I was exhausted. I hadn't even like stood the tent up. But from there is when the climb really starts, because out of Camp 2 to head up to Camp 3 is you go up Lhotse. So Lhotse face, the face of Lhotse. Lhotse is the fourth highest mountain in the world. You actually climb up Lhotse to get to the highest camp in the world, to then be in a position to make a summit attempt on Everest. So, and that's at Camp 3. You may have seen pictures of like tents that are anchored in the side of a ice or snow cliff. And it's straight up for miles. And you're always roped. There's fixed lines that are attached to anchor points. So if you fall, I mean, you're falling for like a mile, it's game over. But that's where you actually start using supplemental oxygen as well. And it's kind of like World War II pilots, where it's, the oxygen mixes with the outside air, because if you were to have 100% like scuba tanks,
Mm-hmm.
if you came off of that, you would pass out and die.
Right.
So the goal is just to reduce the effects of the oxygen slightly. And that's why, but it is 15 pounds. So, I mean, I don't know. I was off oxygen quite a bit during my climb, but for the most part, my wife said, you need to use oxygen. So
Yes.
She's the brains of the family.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Sounds like it. You're incredibly intelligent as well, but she's trying to make sure you come home.
Yep. Yeah, she's smart. So from there, I can take us on my summit push, and that kind of gets into the blind descent story. So it would have been, I had already acclimated, been a month. So I hit Camp 3, went down, waited for like 4 or 5 days, waiting for a 5-day weather window. So on Everest, there's only a couple days where you can summit, because it's up there in the jet stream. And you figure there's only one way up, one way down. So you've probably seen on the news the lines and crowds, and that's just how it is. For me, that's not how it was. I mean, I feel super blessed to have just never stood in a line up there. And it's because good or bad, I chose a day for my summit window 1 day prior to the big push. So I was up at Camp 3.
The big push is getting to the top.
Summit push, yeah. Whereas most people will be like, okay, on this day, we're going to be in a position to go for the summit. So they're all making that summit push. So I was a day ahead of them, and made my way up out of Camp 3, and just, going straight up. It's me and Pasong. We're the only two heading up to high camp. And there was like 70-mile-an-hour winds. So I was definitely pushing to get through that to where it would settle. And then I would have a safe way the next day to get to the summit. But I reached a point where I'm anchored off on this wall of ice, needed to get a drink of water. And I have a whole system. I have my mask, oxygen mask, my goggles. I had to take my goggles off, put it around my arm, and I was taking my mask off and my foot slipped out. And that's where my goggles they slid off my arm and they fell, and they went down the mountain. I thought, I'm posed. You got to protect your eyes.
Right.
And about 500 feet down, some Sherpa were coming up to a higher Camp 3, and they were waving at me, and I'm looking like straight down, and the goggles miraculously went to them, and they tied them off on the rope. I was hoping they would like climb up and bring them to me, but they were done. So I came off oxygen, left my gear there and rappelled down. And when I got to them, I noticed the internal lens was cracked. So during the fall, maybe the way they stopped them, I don't know. So I put them on, and anyone who's been in the cold knows the contrast of your hot breath and the cold outside the cold air will create fog. And they were freezing, but mine were freezing in between layers. So I could barely see out of one of my eyes. Continued, climbed up, got my gear, and just continued climbing. I eventually ripped out the internal lens because there's two lenses in goggles, not realizing that probably cut their effectiveness in half.
Right.
But eventually got up to the South Col, which is the highest camp in the world. It's at 26,000 feet. That's like where the death zone occurs. That's where you have a third of the air, a third of the ozone. Found Pasong. He had continued up and he was in the tent. We made a radio call just to check the weather, see what it's going to be like. So on highly glaciated peaks, you climb through the night because once the sun comes out, things become very unstable. So you have a headlamp, you leave when the sun goes down, and you head up and you hope to be on the summit when the sun rises. So then you can just head back down, allow gravity to get you down.
Why is it unstable when the sun comes up?
So that's when avalanches can get triggered because the sun will start melting off, and all of the anchor points that we use are like aluminum or metal. So it could be an ice screw, it could be a picket so that the rope is attached to. And it gets harder because it'll melt a little bit, then it'll freeze through the night. So it becomes stable. But yeah, if you pull those out, then bad things can happen. So yeah, went up. The two of us left right after the sun set. I got like a cool picture of sun setting at the highest point or highest camp in the world. And then we moved out and just slowly made our way up, and just one step in front of the other. And it was super calm out. The weather, there was like zero wind. It was perfect. There was going to be 50-mile-an-hour gusts the next day, but like if we summited as we had planned and get down, then we'd be ahead of that. He was falling behind, Pasong was, and we are the only two people going for the summit, which is so incredibly rare. According to the Himalayan database, I'm one of two people to have ever had the summit to myself on a given day.
Wow.
Clearly not intending to do that, but he was falling back. I made it to the halfway point, 27,500 feet, and waited for about an hour. And it was surreal. It was cold. Like when you're moving, you're warm, and you have to be careful that you don't sweat because then you can go hypothermic. So there's a lot of things you're dealing with, but got some water, got a snack. And I just remember just waiting. I saw his headlamp down further and he was just kind of making his way up. And there was a lightning storm way in the distance, probably in another country. And it was way below me. And it was just, I took my video camera out and I was just trying to like capture it. It was just one of those surreal moments. And he eventually showed up and he wasn't feeling good. I gave him some water. He ran out of water. He said he'd been throwing up. And, as soon as he took a sip, he vomited. And at that point, I figured we were done. We needed to head back down. And he's like, no, I'm good. We can keep moving. And so I'm like, okay, in these moments, you live and die by decisions, and you don't, I don't know, you can't question them. Anyone who ever says there's stuff that happened, I'm like, I don't know, I wasn't there, because there's a lot of people that are brave behind the keyboard, but in the moment you have the information that you have. And this applies to so many things in life. You make decisions. No decision's the worst decision. But then you have to respond based on those decisions. So we continued up, and at about 28,000 feet, he tapped out. He's like, I can't go on. I'm like, okay, so now it's definitely time to go. And he's like, no. Like the summit's, 1,000 feet that way. There's fixed lines. I'm attached. He's attached. He's like, I'm going to wait back at the balcony. So not too far. So he turned around. Before he did, he left an extra oxygen bottle in the snow right there. He turned around, headed down, never looked back, and I turned up.
So your Sherpa's left. This is essentially your guide, and typically anyone who's going up the mountain has a guide such as this. You're so close to the top, and he tells you to keep going forward. Now, you've never been to the top of this mountain before. You've done a whole bunch of incredible, courageous things up until this point, and you have worked hard to get to the top of the mountain. But tell me what's happening in your mind when you recognize that your guide is no longer going to be with you because unfortunately he's not well, and you still have 1,000 feet. Now he's explained to you that there's a guide to follow. I imagine you said there's like a rope.
Yeah, there's fixed lines. So each season they put like Sherpa or guides will put fixed lines. So they can't clean them up each year. So it's kind of like dreadlocks of rope. So you have to know like the color because the others have probably been frayed and snap out. It's an obvious route from there. So to answer your question, what was I feeling? I was feeling everything. I was running through, how was I doing? I felt strong at that moment. How's the weather? It was super calm. Most important thing, how was Pasang? Could he get down? He assured me he could. He wasn't a climbing guide or a Sherpa guide. He was a climbing Sherpa, which there's a difference. There's a guide that will guide you. He and I were like climbing partners. And in that scenario, you have a conversation. He's going to wait. He ended up going all the way down to high camp because he wasn't feeling well, which is he needed to do that. And that's totally fine. I continued up. So I don't know. It's the whole climb, like earlier up and down. I never felt alone, even when I was alone. I felt just a presence around me, and I never really thought too much about it. And I am comfortable. It's interesting because my job in the military, it's one of the few where you actually do work alone. As soon as you leave the helicopter, it's one to one to many. And you have your crew in the helicopter that is there to support you. But when you're in the water, for the most part, you're doing it on your own. So very comfortable from that perspective. But yeah, just continued it. It's surreal. It's being on Everest just in general it's surreal. It's a lot to process. And one of a huge motivator in climbing through the night is the sun rising. It's your first indication of time and where you should be. And I was halfway up this rock climb, heading up to the south summit, when I looked out to my left and saw a perfect pyramid shadow, which was the sun rising from the highest point in the world, projecting the summit of Everest down on top of the highest mountains in the world, the Himalayas. And I had like a little handheld video camera, took it out and just said a couple words and took that video. And that's the last video I got on that camera because it froze. And I was so grateful to be able to get that later, after it thawed out, and was able to, get that, because it's amazing. I'll watch that now and just be like, that's awesome. And so I continued up, got to the south summit, and from there it's pretty humiliating because then you drop down and then you head back up, and there's an area that's called the Cornice Traverse, which is about a foot wide, and it is a 2-mile drop on each side of you. So you have options, I guess. There's Nepal on the left and Tibet on the right. So depending which way you fall. But just slowly making my way across that. And then it's Hillary Step, which is a 40-foot rock climb. And usually that's a point of contention. That's where you'll see like people like in the lines, because one way up, one way down. I was alone. So just very blessed. I just bounced up that, got to the top, and that's when I could actually finally see the true summit. And it's still going to take like probably a half hour to walk those steps to get there.
Wow.
But it's emotional, and it's impossible to process in the moment. It's still something I'm still processing. It's just a flood of everything, emotion, missing my family, just biggest goal I could have in my life as a climber. And then, piercing my crampons into the summit, like the last steps, it's a lot. And just kind of sat there, took it all in, got my camera out, and took a bunch of the highest selfie in the world, took a bunch of pics and everything. And you just don't have time to stay though. It's like, as long as it takes to get there, you got to get down. The sun is up now. Things are getting, warmer. The wind is picking up. That's for
Right.
sure. So I made a radio call down and said, I'm on the summit. And just, everyone crackled to life, like the radios on the frequency, and just, oh my gosh, that's so great. And a guy that was sharing my facilities with me and the Sherpa support was a day behind me. And he got on and he's like, oh man, congratulations. He's like, be careful getting down. Why don't you and Pasong give me a call once you're below the South Summit? And it was at that moment I realized that no one knew I was alone.
Right.
So I'm like, that's cool, but Pasong went down over an hour ago. He's like, you're alone? I said, yep. He's like, okay, well, be careful. Solid advice. He turned to Lakba Sherpa, who he was climbing with, who had 5 summits, who I'd been climbing with for, during this acclimatization period. And he asked him, he's like, how long do you think it'll take Brian to get to high camp? And he's like, oh, Brian, probably 2-3 hours at the most. And no one would hear from me for 7.
My goodness.
So at that point, I turned my radio off and I put it away and I started moving. I had to get down. And about 10 feet into it, everything went completely white. And because of the goggle malfunction, blue eyes, lack of ozone protection, the sun banked off the ice, fried my cornea, and I went snowblind. And typically snow blindness you'll recover from it in about 24 hours. I wouldn't fully regain my eyesight for a month and a half.
Oh my goodness.
So I was at the highest point in the world, completely alone, completely blind. And without panicking or overthinking, I got up and I started moving. Just one deliberate step at a time. And I tried so hard to use my eyes. With snow blindness, I'm not usually blind. So I was trying so hard, and it's very painful. For one, it feels like if you break potato chips in your eyelids. It's just constantly, I don't recommend it. But if you were to, it's not like black blind, it's like white. Like if you have a bright light bulb an inch from your face, you can't see anything. You can't even focus on that. You can move your finger in front of it and you'd know something just moved. That's how I describe it. So hand over hand, using all my senses, hearing the 50-mile-an-hour gust coming up over the ridge, I would just lower down, lower my center of mass. It would blow over. I'd get up, take another step. And again, this whole time, I felt this presence around me. And I don't know, I didn't feel alone. I felt this peaceful presence. It's like if you and I are in the same room and you close your eyes, I'm still there, even if I don't say something. I don't know how to describe it, but made it to the Hillary Step, the 40-foot rock climb, reversed my gear, tried to rappel down, slipped out. Metal on rock doesn't work so well. Pendulum down, hit the side of the rock, and just kind of slid down the rope. And I remember just kind of laying kind of in a weird, awkward position at the base and just doing an assessment. Like, am I broken? Nope, I think I'm good. Get up, and then all throughout, I would get like a sip of water, and I was just like so dry, and just like you could tell I was just breathing really hard, and I was just really trying to maintain all that.
Mm-hmm.
Got up to the South Summit, which is now I had to climb back out. So it's humiliating, like more work. Got to the top of that. And then that's where I slipped out and just head over heels, just fell. And because it was getting warmer out, and slipped on one of my feet, just slipped out. And
so you're tumbling down the mountain?
Yeah. Yeah. And I'd equate it to if you go to the roof of your house, close your eyes and jump off. It is the most helpless feeling, scary feeling I had ever felt. And I feel like I've been through some things. But the rope shock loaded, which means it stopped my fall. I would have fallen for over a mile. My mask was ripped from my face. My oxygen bottle was out of my pack. And I had to right myself. My heart was just racing out of my chest. Like I could physically just feel it, and righted myself and, continued my composure and started side traversing over. And the whole side of the mountain, this is where the dangers of the heat of the day happen, a slab avalanche, which is where a layer of the snow just kicked off. And I rode that. And I remember just grabbing with my glove, the rope, and it burned a line right through my leather glove. I felt it on my palm. Like I have those gloves. They're sitting here on display at home next to my great goggles. And I stopped myself. Again, my heart rate was just, I could just feel this pattern of just the panic and the chaos that wanted to come in, and I had to suppress it. So ended up getting over to the rocky area, got down to where Pasong had turned around, and I almost walked right past the oxygen. I knew mine was going to be out soon.
Mm-hmm.
But there was this bright orange orb like buried, and oh yeah, I lay down next to it, and I fumble around with the regulator, and it wouldn't work. So no oxygen was coming out. So I don't know what the problem was. I didn't have all day to troubleshoot. I had to keep my momentum. So I put my other oxygen back together. I don't know why today, like even today, I put that extra 15 pounds in my pack, and I started moving, and eventually got to where Pasong was supposed to be at the balcony there. And he wasn't. So I assumed he had moved down. And I remember being happy at that moment, though. Like I had just got down some pretty intense areas, and I had like 20 pitches of rappel to get down. I'm like, I can do this.
I heard you say that you come down and you're, excuse me. I heard you say that you come down and your Sherpa isn't there. Hassan, is that how you say it appropriately?
Pasong, yep.
So he's not where we'd expected him to be. You just had snow blindness. You've tumbled down the mountain only to have your rope yank you and save you, where your mask is falling off, your other oxygen's falling out of your pack, your heart's racing out of your body. And you get to this space where this gentleman could be here and help you hook up the other oxygen tank, but he's not. And in that moment, you're happy?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think
walk me through that, because I would be
what's wrong with you?
full panic attack.
Think about like major milestones. I'm in full on survival mode. So I'm accomplishing one area of survival to the next. And yeah, I wasn't like celebrating happy, like whatever. I just remember it was like a happy relief, because when you can't see anything and then you find out where you're at, without vision,
right?
Okay, I know where I'm at, and I know I can get down this. So maybe it was more relief than happy. But yeah, I reversed my gear, started rappelling down, and then, I don't know, 15 yards into it, my mask just sucks into my face. And I ran out of oxygen. And I remember at that point, I dropped to my knees. I'd been climbing for 33 hours from the day prior to this point. I'd lost 20 pounds, completely blind. And if you run out of oxygen on Everest, there's a good chance you're not going to survive. And I knew, I'm, like you said earlier, I'm not as smart as my wife, but I'm relatively smart, that there's a good chance that I was not going to live. But the last thing I'm ever going to do is think about that. You allow that to get in your head, and that's exactly what will happen. So I did everything to suppress that, to find a reason to take one more step forward. And in that moment, I had been trying so hard to do it on my own, and I felt that presence around me the entire time. I dropped to my knees, and I prayed very simply, God, I cannot do this alone. Please help. And in that very moment, on the other side of the world, my wife, Joanna, she was at a conference of some sort, and she was asleep and was woken up. and just felt the need to pray for me. And I had other people reach out months later. Some that I didn't even know them. They just knew I was climbing. They heard my story. Like, you don't know me, but I just felt the need to pray for you in this moment. And it was just so powerful to hear those things later. It's the power of prayer. But at that moment, I said that prayer very simply, and immediately it just felt like someone reached down and picked me up. And I had this energy, and the first thing I did, I didn't overthink it. I tried that extra oxygen bottle, and I got a positive flow.
Sure.
And it was painful. I felt this air re-enter my veins, and it was like fire. I've never experienced something like that. I felt this life re-enter my veins, and put my gear back, gained my composure, and I just started rappelling as fast as I could, which was super slow, but just intentional, not tripping over myself. And I remember getting into kind of the last quarter mile is the ice bulge. It's just this massive bulletproof ice that leads into camp. And just staring, and I could see these blurry objects, and I thought they were like people, and I'd get closer, it'd be a rock. I'd be like, oh, stupid rock. And then at one point I thought I might have died. Like, I'm like, this is heaven. This sucks. And then out of nowhere, a song just hugs me. Never saw him coming. He's like, Brian, you alive? And he's like, I'm so sorry I leave you. And I'm like, oh, it's cool, dude. No worries. I'm like, just super chill. And he helped me get back, and tripping over rocks and, collapsed in the tent. I gave him my camera, and he's looking through the pictures and everything. And I passed out for 15 hours. My eyes were glued shut. Like I said, I lost 20 pounds at black eyes. But I was alive. I still had to get down the mountain, still 2 days just to get down Lhotse face, across the ladders, through the ice fall. Couldn't even talk to Joanna until the next day at Camp 2, where I borrowed someone's satellite phone, had them dial her number. And worst phone call in history, FYI. Worse because she's all excited to hear, she knew I was going for the summit. She didn't know anything. And I said, I soloed the summit, and I'm blind. And then the phone hung up, and I couldn't get back to her until the next day.
Oh my goodness.
I know, right? I'm horrible.
Oh my goodness.
We laugh at it now, so that's why I can laugh, I think. But yeah.
Yes. So she knows her husband is safe, but he's blind, and she can't get in contact with him again for another 24 hours?
Nope. So the next day I went down, we left at night, made it down through the ice fall, and down there I was able to give her a call, and we talked for an hour. So I had a cell phone down there that had this line of sight, bad 3G service, but we were able to talk and cry together. And the Sherpa made a summit cake for me, and it was special. But I still had the 38 miles to get out. I still didn't have my vision. Had to get home, and that's my see, now you don't need to buy the book.
No,
I told you everything.
I know there's much, much more in the book, so I'm excited to grab this book on Amazon, I believe, right?
Mm-hmm.
On Amazon, and just dig deeper into that story. But what you've told thus far, honestly, your journey it was so hard, so difficult. There were so many times that I don't want to say a normal person, but someone with less drive, less focus on the goal would quit. I would have quit probably around the first mile of the 38-mile hike to the first base because I don't like to be cold. But
would you have ever started?
You know what? To be honest with you, no, because I'm a desert girl. I love to hike. But I love the heat. So I'm the weird one that the mountain rangers will come down and say, hey, it's about to hit 107. So we're getting everyone down. And I'm like, I think I'm good. But here in Arizona, because that hasn't worked out for everyone. They definitely, get us down the mountain around like 111. You can't be on the mountain.
Yeah.
But so I'm like the opposite of you in that way. And snow is not my favorite. But what I'm hearing you say is that everyone knows that hiking Everest is difficult. By the time you're down the mountain, you're blind, you're 20 pounds lighter. And I believe I heard you say in another interview that that was muscle.
Yep. Yeah, it's very common because when you're lacking oxygen, the oxygen in the air, your survival is eating away at you. You're dying in that time, and it's eating away that muscle. So then you just have whatever reserve you have. And this has happened to me a few times on Aconcagua, which is highest point in Argentina, not going blind or anything, but just during that summit push where you lose weight on Denali up in Alaska, same type of thing. It's not like a good weight loss program though, because it's like taking the good. So
Definitely not. We're not encouraging anyone to hike Everest to lose 20 pounds. That's for sure. But I would like to know, with this incredible experience that you've written a book about, and we won't dive too much deeper because we do want to save some of the surprises in the book. But what did you learn overall? I mean, this is you're one of two to do this alone in the world. There's over 300 people that never made it back down the mountain. You've made it down. You have this incredible story. What have you learned from this? How do you see this experience in your everyday life?
yeah, well, I think we all have something impactful in our life that we can or should go back to when you're stressed out, or someone else. You can never compare one to the other. So like, fortunately, and unfortunately, I've been a motivational speaker and have told my story a ton. I say unfortunate because when I got back, I had news channels, I was on Anderson Cooper and like everything. And I'm dealing with PTSD and the survivor's guilt and everything that goes along with it, and having to retell my story over and over and over. And I would just be in tears. And even now, how many years later, talking to you, and you can replay the tape, but I'm getting emotional in certain areas. It's just like the power of prayer and just these things that are so far beyond me. And why am I worthy? Why am I here? And I think you go through something like this and you find that there's such a bigger purpose than anything you ever imagined, and being able to share it and to help others. And even to those 300 plus people that have passed, I've talked to family members, and I can tell you, if I would have died up there, it would have been a very peaceful. And I think in those scenarios, those people that did pass, it was probably very peaceful. Life is going very slow. You're at that point, you can close your eyes and fall asleep forever. But so many people are just going through just so much in their lives, and it's real. I always hate the analogy, it's their Everest or whatever, but I mean, it is. It's this huge climb, and maybe it's their blind descent, whatever, call it whatever you will. It's real, and it's impacting. So yeah, so I think there's that. Even my faith, like I've been a Christian most of my life, even when I didn't necessarily know what that meant. I never had such a tangible experience or given credit to such an experience. I've always tried to do things on my own. And like I said, I knew there's a high chance I wouldn't survive getting down, but I was going to do everything I could in my power, and I did, and it wasn't enough. And I think whatever anyone believes in, but Jesus, Holy Spirit was there walking alongside, hand out. I'm here if you need me. Just call to me, dummy. Keep going on your own. See how far you get, And it's like, at some point, he knew it was coming. And I witnessed a miracle. And I don't know. I can't explain it any other way. And I'm just very fortunate. And it's overwhelming to think about, when you're the character in that story.
Great. This had to have increased your faith as a man of faith, recognizing I can't do this alone. I know this whole time I haven't been alone. I felt his presence, and now I need him more than ever. And to just fall to your knees and pray and say, I can't do this without you. And in that moment or near that time, here comes your Sherpa to help guide you down. I myself am getting emotional thinking about your cry for help. You've done so much. You literally got to the top. You accomplished your goal. You still have to get down.
That's the goal.
And that's the goal, to arrive alive. And you're close. And you still needed that help, and you knew what to do and to cry out. And you said that your wife knew to pray for you and that others knew to pray for you as well. With all of that being the case, I imagine that your faith got that much stronger.
Yeah. Yeah. And just being on stage, being in front of on TV, millions, there's a high likelihood there'll be a movie made about blind descent. I have a team working on that right now. I've been approached since day one, but I don't like the whole Hollywood thing in the direction that it was going. So I said, I'll write a book and we'll just kind of go from there. But now I have a very respectful team that's really big in the film industry. So we'll see. But yeah, it's also a step out of faith. I've been more private in my journey throughout my life and can't be anymore. So, I mean, I'm on the Bible app, like on Veterans Day this year, you'll see me as doing the verse of the day. And I have devotionals I've written and been able to be in large churches and, faith-based orgs, and even sharing my faith on non-faith-based orgs, and big high-tech companies, and done the prayer breakfast for the state of Idaho. And yeah, it's pretty amazing, and I think too, from I don't know, like a fraud, or, you kind of have these syndromes that we can go through of, I'm not worthy of this, because you see other people and like we all have our story and we're all worthy.
Absolutely.
And, so I mean, you got to kind of silence that voice.
How do you navigate through your imposter syndrome? Because I think that that's definitely something we all feel. Once I started my doctorate, same concept. What am I doing? Dr. Richards, I mean, I'm just Freda. Same concept, until you have your community or those around you that, breathe that life into you and remind you who you are. What did that look like for you to deal in the midst of that?
Yeah, and honestly, I don't know if you do get over it, because you're always that little child that went through whatever trauma, and those voices are there. I mean, you have to have, one, grace and forgiveness for yourself, and constantly release it. My verse is Psalm 46:10, be still and know that I am God. And it's saved me so many times of just release it. Stop trying to do this and be patient, and, silence that voice. One thing you do not do is read anything those brave people on the internet have to say on, Amazon or anything, good or bad.
Right.
So the bad, that can just get in your head, and, it's, AI or, some 12-year-old who's got nothing going on. Good, it's going to, inflate your ego, and there's nothing good there. Before my mom passed, she was my biggest fan, and she would be like going after people on Amazon. I'm like, Mom, thank you, that's so sweet, but don't. It just makes it worse.
People go after her, baby. I'm a mom of two boys. I would probably do the same thing if my boys were in a book and someone said, oh my goodness. Well, that is a super powerful story. I know that you've encouraged me in regards to just your drive to be able to accomplish your goal, you staying focused, one step at a time, having life slow down. And now using your story and sharing it with so many people, so much so that you're going to be on the Bible app on Veterans Day. So I look forward to seeing that. Currently, right now, I know you work for you're using your MBA at. Could you tell me the name of your company, or should we share that? Tell me what you feel most comfortable with.
I'd just say I work in high tech because I cover Amazon and Microsoft. I have forever, but I don't know. It's so confusing to say what I do. Like I'm a pre-sales engineer.
Pre-sales engineer. So what does that mean that you do?
I don't know. Take people to lunch and stuff.
There you go.
I have to meet with like Amazon and Microsoft to understand their their architecture, their technology solutions, and to align, if it makes sense, our solutions with theirs to solve problems.
How do you use your education, your MBA, to be successful in your career, or do you?
I Yeah, it's helped in like all aspects. I mean, even like all the self promotion and marketing for like writing a book. There's so much involved. But I'd say the job that I do, like a lot of people will get their MBA, they start a business, I have done that, but they'll usually get into management, and I have done that. But what I found is I like to kind of straddle a lot of different things, and having an MBA in technology management helps give me that breadth of knowledge that just kind of like spreads, so I can be very efficient and effective in like a lot of different areas, and just not just be so one dimensional like some of my peers can be. It's good, you need that,
Right.
but you also you know
You need the variety. So, being in this position, I imagine, like with the AI and technologies changing so quickly, that you have to see a lot of movement and change in your particular genre of work. What have you seen? What do you see changing or moving in the future with IT?
yeah I Okay, so there's always the hype cycle, and you're always going to get stuff that's like overly hyped way too early, and then technologies that are maybe superior fail because they just weren't ready for prime time, and then they end up catching up or whatever, or someone else just I don't know, steals their idea. But yeah, I see automation and orchestration is huge. You take the human element out of it, and then you have less mistakes. Doesn't mean you are decreasing that knowledge, expertise, or need. It just changes. Like no one could have imagined working on a computer all day, 30 years ago, when everything was on paper. You see like old movies that you watched in 80s movies and no computer in sight. And that's just how life
Hmm.
was. It's like, my goodness, that's so crazy. So, in the future, we'll be looking at that thinking, oh man, that's so crazy. Or they look back at us and you guys are nuts, just paving the way.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Tell me, you've clearly have done some overwhelmingly adventurous and challenging things in your life. What advice would you give to others in regards to accomplishing something that seems seemingly impossible?
I think there's a balance of being realistic and challenging yourself, because it's easy to talk ourselves down or allow others to do it. Those voices in our heads, like you are you, and you're worthy, and you have the capability, but you're never going to know that unless you are, if you're okay with potentially failing, because that fear of failure will paralyze so many people. Well, I can't do it. So, or maybe in the past I couldn't do it. Like, you have to have that open mindset and continually challenge yourself. And failure is okay. I don't remember like all the tests I've ever taken in my life. I don't remember much about the ones I passed, but those ones that I failed or just didn't do as well.
Right.
I learned so much because one, you either have to take it again, so then you're relearning that material, but also I don't know, it gives you this different, I don't know, mindset to go back and be like, oh, why didn't I do good here? So then you're filling in those gaps. So I don't know, maybe that's just my experience.
No, you were definitely not alone in that. I wish that I didn't have so many tests to be able to associate that with, but I have definitely had my share of tests that I've needed to retake in the past. You have so much going on. You have another book named Calm in the Chaos. Can you tell me more about that one?
Yeah. So this book, I guess it's been in the back of my mind for some time. And after Everest, I've had the opportunity to talk to just thousands. And the question that I get asked the most is, how didn't you panic when you knew you were blind and alone on the top of the world? And I don't know, like in my talks, maybe I just blush over that and just really stick to, the survival piece. But there's a psychological, a piece of, how to remain calm. And I think a lot of that is from my military training. Besides obviously a miracle, there's a lot of technical here that, I learned that was a part of my DNA from the military training. So in talking to my wife, I'm like, I think there could be an interesting book, and there's never been a book written on what I did, my special operations group in the military. But what I didn't want was a book about me. Like Blind Descent, it's my memoir. I thought this was an opportunity to not have a book just about Brian, but about those that have paved the way back from the Apollo 13 pickup of the astronauts to Vietnam veterans to Hurricane Katrina to some of my own stories to just hellacious helicopter crashes. It's like all these different scenarios of how did these aviation rescue swimmers all throughout time, what is this common thread that we could abstract, and maybe normal people out there that will never go through those experiences but are panicking in their own lives, whether it's relationships, finances, COVID, whatever, politics, maybe they could utilize something and see it in, these extraordinary stories that have never been told, and have, some sort of takeaway that they can apply to their personal life. And the cool thing about it is my wife's Christian counselor. She co-wrote with me, so she's a major contributor. So I have all these people that I interviewed, just, such a gift to be able to tell their stories, but also to have my wife, Joanna, intertwined her wisdom and knowledge from counseling to apply it to people that, that they can have like a real takeaway from it. As I know a lot of times military, it can be like hardcore, and I don't know, just get over it, just power through it, because that's what we were told. So there is some of that, but also it's very applicable. So, and again, that's huge vulnerability, right? Because I have a peer group that a book has never been written on, and getting it released just last week, that was my biggest fear. And they love it. Like the response has been overwhelming. Like, thank you, so much for writing about us, telling our stories. This should be mandatory reading for anyone who goes through this, and civilian for panicking in their lives. I was like, okay. But like you mentioned earlier, it's like try and fail. I guess I'd rather try and fail. I put myself out there, and, I'm sure there'll be haters out there, because there always are. But for the most part, the response has been really good so far. So I'm going to call it week 1 a success.
Yes, week 1. Congratulations on your second book.
Thanks.
That you just released, and it's been successful. The subjects are excited that you've written about them, since no one's ever done that before. And you and your wife had the opportunity to work together. Special shout out to Joanna, because You called her while climbing Mount Everest and told her that you were blind and the phone hung up. And then she's partnering with you in writing a book. This woman is incredible. While having these
Mhm.
two children, she helped you raise. So special shout out to Joanna, who is clearly an incredible woman.
Yeah, she is. Thank you.
So she partners with you and uses her great knowledge of psychology to partner with you in speaking to people about these hard times that they had to deal with. Is that correct?
Yeah. So yeah, hers. It's interesting because it's not so much a contrast, but it's a soft approach. So everything is in italics that she wrote. So I'll go through like these kind of horrific. Some of them are like horrific stories, um, but amazing, and just how they survived. And yeah, it's just some of them like give me goosebumps. Like, and I wrote the thing and still write it. And a handful of people have actually passed away since I've interviewed them. So writing a book for just signing to their kids and to their wives, and just what a hero they were and what a gift it was to be able to share their story. But then Joanna having that kind of soft approach that most people that read military books probably wouldn't. It might be too much military jargon, or they might just avoid it. They might be surprised, but this gives them a way that maybe a husband and wife, if the wife is serving, husband's not, whatever the scenario is, they could enjoy it together.
Wow. Well, I'm looking forward to the book. Uh, I'm really looking forward to the calm of chaos and learning what you can do to pace yourself before panicking, or how to calm yourself in the midst of chaos. So that's exciting. And again, congratulations to you and your wife on such an incredible accomplishment. You
Thanks.
what is next? You've had two books. You've climbed Mount Everest. You've had this incredible career. What's next?
Well, you never know what's around the corner. Like I'm not, unless I'm physically can't be adventurous, I'm not giving that up anytime soon. I do enjoy, like, I live near Mount Rainier, it's a 14,000-foot peak, highly glaciated. I enjoy bringing like veterans up. I've brought NFL players, Navy SEALs, and that's always neat to just kind of have that experience. I think there's definitely some more writing in my future, and yeah, we'll see what happens with Blind Descent in the movie, but there's always that potential.
Yes. So the likelihood of us getting a movie of Blind Descent is so exciting. I can't wait to hear more about it and to find out when it will be coming out. So you'll have to share that information with us so that we can share it with our listeners, who I'm sure will also be excited after hearing your story to see it. Well, listen, the floor is yours. You have so many accomplishments. I want to make sure that our listeners, if you had any notes for them or anything that you wanted them to share or to share with them prior to the end of the episode, feel free. The floor is yours. What would you like to share with our visitors, our listeners?
Yeah, there's always so many takeaways. I think where we kind of started, as far as the experiences that we were dealt, you know, there's so many good out there, and it's good to focus on those. But I know a lot of people have a lot of bad as well, and it's so, first of all, I'm sorry that happened, and that's just it stinks, and I've been there. But I really do encourage you to not camp in it. That there is hope. That you're worthy. Um, on Everest, my survival came down to faith and focus. Like focus is funny because I couldn't see a thing, but I knew what it took to get down that mountain. I had to find a reason to take one more step forward. And I think it's so common in life. Like when you don't want to go on, find a reason, whether that's getting outside, whether that's walking across the street and helping someone, serving others, whatever it is. And then faith, when I couldn't do it on my own, I witnessed a miracle, and miracles are happening every single day. We may not acknowledge that. We may not allow that in, but it's okay to be vulnerable. And yeah, that's really what I have. Like there's a lot of lessons around, like, at least my blind descent, and I try not to overcomplicate things because then we get in our own head. So it really comes down to faith and focus.
I don't think you could have said it any better. Faith and focus. That's excellent advice. With that, we're going to move into rapid fire questions and have a little bit of fun. Let people get to know you a little bit more. So you do a lot and you have to get energized every now and again. Is it coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Coffee. Mountain or ocean?
Are you looking for one word answers here?
You can say whatever you'd like.
Okay. Mountain or ocean? Oh, both.
Both.
So like Southern Oregon has like where the Goonies was filmed, or actually it's not Southern. I grew up in Southern Oregon, but in Oregon at Cannon Beach, we love going down there. There's mountains and there's ocean. So I choose both.
The perfect combo. I figured that you'd be in between being a diver and then also climbing the mountain. I was curious which one you'd pick. And so I love that it's a yes to both. Your favorite book besides your own?
Favorite book? No, I would never do that. I'm not that guy. I love the book Fearless by Eric Blem. It's about a Navy SEAL who had his eye shot out. He still made it through all the schools, had all of his fingers cut off on a Humvee that rolled over, and he still became DevGru SEAL Team 6. He actually served with a good friend of mine on Team 6 and ended up dying, and my friend carried him out of battle. And then my friend actually got shot down in a Chinook helicopter a few months after I got back from Everest. So, but the book is just a culmination of everything amazing that you could put in a book, and it's a real story. And I know that's probably going to be made into a movie as well. And Eric's a friend of mine. He actually endorsed Calm in the Chaos as well. So it's a small world, but love it. Yeah, I've read it a few times, and I don't usually read books multiple times.
Fearless. Excellent. It sounds like a really good book. Your biggest pet peeve?
My pet peeve is excuses. It's like everyone always has an excuse, and that's all they are. It's like, get over it. That's a barrier you're putting in front of yourself. It's like, stop making excuses. And I don't know. I'm a big proponent of try and fail because, because that's okay. And then get used to that. Don't be a failure. You're going to be a succeeder. I don't know if that's a word.
It is today.
But yeah, okay. But yeah, people that just make excuses, everything's an excuse. And guarantee every year, January 1st, January 2nd, I will have everybody reaching out to me that they want to climb something, and will I take them somewhere? And I'm always like, yeah, here's the work to do it, because everyone's motivated. The weather's horrible. They know they have 6 months until they could actually do it. Almost 100% of them will never do it because they're going to create those barriers. There's going to be an excuse. It's never the right time. Guess what? Every day is a gift. We don't know what our health will be tomorrow, our ability, our life, state of the world. It's like, no excuses.
That's so good. Every day's a gift. So no excuses. What's your favorite go-to karaoke song?
I think Welcome to the Jungle, just because I can do Axl Rose like better than he can.
I'm going to have to demand an example.
And you're not going to get it.
All right.
It's got to be in the right mood. And right now, my dogs are sleeping right now, and that just might disrupt their harmonious vibe.
I totally understand. That. Wouldn't want to wake the pups. Lastly, what is your personal motto? For so long it was power through. And then I think
Everest kind of changed that. And I don't know, it kind of aligns with my, I guess my Bible verse, Psalm 46:10, is just to be still. Because in so many situations, we can jump to a conclusion. We can, fight, flight, or freeze. All of those can be a result of just not pausing for a second to realize, assessing the situation, understanding what's going on, not panicking, not reacting out of emotion. I think if we just pause for a second, a lot of times, then a lot of things can be avoided, or we can at least have a better lens into how we approach life.
Take a moment and pause before addressing. That's very good advice. You've been nothing but an impeccable guest, and your story is so great that they're making a movie about it. So we're looking forward to that. We're so grateful that you were able to join us today. We're so proud to call you a University of Phoenix alumni. So thank you so much for sharing this with us. But before you go, we want people to be able to find out how to stay connected with you, how to take advantage of finding the book, and then maybe even one day learning about when the movie's coming out. So how would they do that?
Yeah, the Google always tends to find me. But my website is briandickinson.net, because someone stole .com. And I'm not going to pay them thousands of dollars to get it. So briandickinson.net. And then I'm on every flavor of social media. It's Brian C. Dickinson. So yeah, I keep all those things up to date. And looking forward to connecting with some of the University of Phoenix folks and alumni.
Absolutely. And both of your books are on Amazon. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think Calm might be in bookstores at this point on shelves, but yeah, Amazon tends to hit 85% of all sales. So yeah, definitely Amazon.
Perfect. Well, as I said before, your story has been inspiring to me. I'm spoiled. I get to meet these incredible University of Phoenix alumni and take all of these great pieces of advice, like faith and focus, and take a breath before reacting. And I'm grateful, because these are incredible pieces of advice from people who've truly gone through it. And so thank you so much for sharing that with me and our other listeners, and sharing your incredible story. That brings us to the end of this episode of Degrees of Success. I'm your host, Freda Richards. Don't forget to subscribe, comment, and like. And remember, your next chapter just might be your best one yet. See you guys soon.